David loved camping alone in the desert. He had been doing it for years, always finding peace in the quiet nights under the stars. This time, he picked a spot in the Nevada wilderness, far from any roads or people, just him, his tent, and the endless sky above. On his third night, something woke him up around midnight. It wasn't a sound exactly, more like a feeling that something was wrong. The air felt different, charged with electricity like before a thunderstorm. David sat up in his sleeping bag and looked around. Everything seemed normal at first, then he saw the glow. A strange orange light was coming from somewhere behind the rocks, maybe a quarter-mile away. David grabbed his flashlight and stepped out of his tent. The desert was completely silent, which was odd. Usually, you could hear coyotes or owls, but tonight there was nothing. He walked toward the light, his boots crunching softly on the sand and small stones. As he got closer, the glow got brighter, and he could smell something metallic in the air, like when you touch a battery with your tongue. When David climbed over a small ridge, his heart almost stopped. Below him in the canyon was wreckage scattered everywhere. Pieces of metal that looked like nothing he had ever seen before. They were smooth and curved, with patterns that seemed to shift when he looked at them directly. Some pieces were still glowing with that orange light. David stood there for a long moment, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. His first thought was that a plane had crashed, but this didn't look like any aircraft he knew. The metal was too strange, too perfect, and there was no smell of fuel or smoke. Then he saw movement among the larger pieces of wreckage. Something was lying on the ground. At first, David thought it might be a person who had been in the crash. He was a paramedic back home, so his training kicked in immediately. Someone might be hurt and need help. He climbed down into the canyon, being careful not to cut himself on the scattered metal. As he got closer to the figure, his flashlight beam revealed something that made him question everything. He thought he knew about the world. It was definitely shaped like a person, but it wasn't human. Not exactly. The being was about his height, maybe a little shorter. She looked female, with a slender build and long limbs. But her skin was pale, almost white, and it seemed to glow faintly with its own soft light. David rubbed his eyes, thinking maybe he was dreaming, but when he looked again, she was still there. Her face was beautiful in an otherworldly way. Her features were delicate, almost perfect, but her eyes were closed. Long, silver-white hair spread around her head like a halo, but something was wrong with it. Dark, thick substance covered most of her hair, making it look matted and dirty. David knelt down beside her, his paramedic training overriding his shock. He checked for breathing and found that she was alive, but her breathing was shallow and labored. Her skin felt warm to the touch, but not quite like human skin. It was softer somehow, and wherever the dark substance from her hair touched her skin, that gentle glow seemed to fade. She made small sounds, almost like humming or singing, even though she was unconscious. It was the most beautiful sound David had ever heard, but there was pain in it too. Looking at her more closely, David could see that the dark substance in her hair wasn't just dirt. It looked almost alive, slowly spreading through the silver strands. Wherever it touched, her hair lost its natural shine and became dull. Even worse, it seemed to be affecting her health. Her breathing became more difficult whenever the substance spread to a new area. David had seen many accident victims in his years as a paramedic, but nothing had prepared him for this. Here was a being who was clearly not from Earth, lying injured among the wreckage of what could only be a spacecraft. Part of him wanted to run, to pretend this never happened. Another part wanted to call the authorities immediately, but the biggest part of him, the part that had made him become a paramedic in the first place, just wanted to help. He looked around at the crash site, trying to understand what had happened. The metal pieces seemed to be cooling down, their glow gradually fading. There was no sign of fire or explosion, which was strange for any kind of crash. It was as if whatever this vehicle was had simply stopped working and fallen from the sky. David made his decision. He couldn't leave her here alone, and he couldn't in good conscience call the government or military. He had heard too many stories about what happened to people who reported UFO sightings. More importantly, this being was clearly in distress and needed immediate help. Carefully, David slipped his arms under her and lifted her up. She was lighter than he expected, and her skin felt warm against his arms. The humming sound got a little louder when he moved her, but she didn't wake up. He carried her back to his campsite, moving slowly and carefully in the darkness. With each step, he kept thinking about how his life had just changed forever. Yesterday, he was just a guy taking a camping trip. Now, he was carrying an alien being back to his tent, trying to figure out how to help someone whose biology he didn't understand. Back at his campsite, David set up a makeshift medical area using his first aid supplies and camping gear. He had brought more medical equipment than most campers, a habit from his professional life. As he worked, he kept glancing at the unconscious being, still hardly believing this was real. The dark substance in her hair seemed to be getting worse, spreading faster now. David could see that it was definitely connected to her declining condition. Whatever this stuff was, it was poisoning her somehow, and he was probably the only person in 100 miles who could help. As the first light of dawn began to appear over the desert mountains, David sat beside his unexpected patient, wondering what would happen when she woke up. He had no idea that he was about to become part of the most important first contact in human history, all because he couldn't ignore someone who needed help. Part 2. The sun was just starting to peek over the desert mountains when David heard her stirring. He had been awake for hours, sitting beside his unexpected visitor and checking on her every few minutes. The dark substance in her hair seemed to be spreading faster now, and he could tell she was getting weaker. The first sound she made wasn't quite human. It was musical, like someone humming a song in a language that didn't exist. But there was pain in it too, and fear. David leaned closer, trying to let her know she wasn't alone. Her eyes opened slowly, and David felt his breath catch. They were the most incredible color he had ever seen, a deep purple that seemed to shift and shimmer like the surface of a lake. When she first looked at him, those amazing eyes went wide with what could only be terror. She tried to sit up fast, probably thinking she needed to run or fight, but her body wasn't ready for sudden movement. She collapsed back down onto the sleeping bag David had arranged for her, making sounds of distress that needed no translation. David held up both hands, palms out, the universal gesture for I'm not a threat. He had learned this from years of working as a paramedic. Sometimes scared patients needed to see that you weren't going to hurt them before they would let you help. Hey, it's okay, he said in the softest voice he could manage. I'm not going to hurt you. You're safe here. She stared at him for what felt like forever, those purple eyes studying every detail of his face. David could almost see her mind working, trying to figure out if he was dangerous. Finally, she said something in her musical language, pointing at herself and then at him. David got the feeling she was trying to introduce herself, even though neither of them could understand the other's words. It seemed like the polite thing to do, so he pointed at himself and said clearly, David. My name is David. She tilted her head like a curious bird, then tried to repeat what he had said. What came out was something like David, but with extra musical notes that made it sound like a song. When she pointed at herself, she made a sound like water flowing over silver bells. It was beautiful, but David knew he would never be able to pronounce it correctly. I'm sorry, he said, shaking his head. I don't think my mouth can make those sounds. Even though she couldn't understand his words, she seemed to get what he meant. She nodded and made a sound that might have been laughter. Then she looked around at his campsite, taking in the tent, the camping gear, and especially the first aid supplies he had spread out nearby. Her gaze stopped on the medical kit, and David saw recognition in her eyes. Whatever species she was from, they apparently understood the concept of medical help. That was encouraging. She tried to sit up again, this time moving much more carefully. David scooted closer to help her, and when his hands touched her arms to steady her, something unexpected happened. She went completely still, not with fear, but with surprise. She looked down at where his hands were touching her, then back up at his face with an expression he couldn't read. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" David asked, even though he knew she probably couldn't understand him. Sometimes tone of voice could get a message across even when words couldn't. He gently examined her arms and legs, looking for cuts or broken bones from the crash. Apart from some minor scrapes and bruises, she seemed physically okay. But the problem with her hair was definitely getting worse. The dark, tar-like substance had spread to cover most of her silver hair now, and wherever it touched her skin, that gentle glow started to fade. Her breathing was getting more labored, too, and David could see that whatever this stuff was, it was poisoning her slowly. She noticed him looking at her hair and raised one trembling hand to touch it. When her fingers came away covered with the dark gunk, she made a sound of pure distress. The musical quality was still there, but now it sounded like a funeral song. She was scared, and David didn't blame her. He pointed at her hair, then made washing motions with his hands. "Clean," he said, hoping she would understand. "Water. We need to clean this out." Her eyes lit up immediately, and she nodded so enthusiastically that David almost smiled despite the seriousness of the situation. But then her expression changed to something more complicated. She pointed at him, then at her hair, then made a gesture that seemed to be asking a question. It was like she was making sure he really meant what he was saying. "Yes," David said firmly, nodding. "I want to help you. This stuff is making you sick." She stared at him for a long moment, and David could practically see her having some kind of internal debate. Whatever she was thinking about, it seemed like a big decision. Finally, she nodded slowly and said something in her language that sounded like agreement. David helped her stand up, and he was relieved to see that she was steadier on her feet than he had expected. She was still weak, but there was determination in the way she held herself. Whatever was happening to her, she wasn't going to give up without a fight. Together, they walked slowly around his campsite while David tried to figure out the best way to help her. He had several bottles of water with him, but looking at the amount of contamination in her hair, he realized it was going to take more than just pouring water over her head. The dark substance looked thick and sticky, almost like motor oil mixed with tar. It was going to need some kind of soap or cleaning agent to break it down. David dug through his camping supplies and found a small bottle of biodegradable soap. It was designed to be gentle and environmentally safe, which seemed important when dealing with someone whose biology he knew nothing about. He showed her the soap bottle, and she took it from him carefully. She opened it and smelled it, making a face that was probably the alien equivalent of "that's weird, but not terrible." Then she looked at him and made a sound that seemed like approval. But there was still something bothering her. She kept looking at him with that same expression of confusion, and something that might have been nervousness. It wasn't fear exactly, more like someone who was about to do something important and wasn't sure if they were ready for it. "We need more water than what I have here," David said, mostly thinking out loud. Then he remembered the natural spring about half a mile away. He had discovered it on his first day of camping and had been getting his drinking water from there. It was clean and fresh, probably better than anything he could carry in bottles. He pointed in the direction of the spring and made walking gestures. "Water," he said. "Clean. Fresh water." She understood immediately and nodded eagerly. But as they prepared to leave the campsite, she kept giving him those strange looks. There was definitely something about this whole situation that she found surprising or confusing. But David couldn't figure out what it was. Whatever was bothering her, it wasn't enough to make her change her mind about accepting his help. The contamination in her hair was clearly getting worse by the hour, and they both knew that cleaning it out was becoming urgent. As they walked toward the spring together, the alien woman moved carefully but with purpose. Every few steps, she would glance at David like she was still trying to figure him out. Sometimes she would start to say something in her musical language, then stop and shake her head like she had decided against it. David found himself wondering what was going through her mind. Here she was, stranded on an alien planet, accepting help from a species she had probably never encountered before. That had to be terrifying, even if he was trying his best to be harmless. What he didn't realize was that her confusion had nothing to do with fear. She wasn't worried about whether he was safe. His actions had already proved that. What she couldn't understand was why he was willing to do something so significant for a complete stranger, especially when he clearly had no idea what it meant. In her culture, the walk to the spring gave David time to think about how surreal his life had become. 24 hours ago, he had been a regular guy on a camping trip. Now he was about to help an alien being clean contamination out of her hair. And somehow that felt like the most natural thing in the world. He had always been the kind of person who couldn't walk past someone who needed help. It had gotten him into trouble sometimes, but it had also led him to become a paramedic. Taking care of people was just part of who he was. As they approached the spring, David had no idea that his simple desire to help was about to accidentally make him part of the most sacred ritual. In an alien culture, all he knew was that someone was suffering, and he had the ability to help them feel better. Sometimes the most important moments in life start with nothing more complicated than that. The spring was hidden in a small grove of twisted dessert trees, creating a natural oasis that felt almost magical in the early morning light. Clear water bubbled up from somewhere deep underground, forming a pool about the size of a bathtub before flowing away into the desert sand. When they reached the water, the alien woman immediately knelt down and cupped some in her hands. She drank deeply, and David could see color returning to her pale cheeks. Whatever her species needed to survive, clean water was apparently part of it, just like humans. David knelt beside the pool and filled his camping pot with the fresh spring water. He added a few drops of the biodegradable soap and swirled it around until it formed a gentle, soapy mixture. The woman watched every move he made, and he noticed that nervous expression was getting stronger. She said something in her musical language, and her tone sounded urgent, like she was trying to warn him about something. She kept pointing back and forth between him and herself, then making hand gestures that David couldn't begin to interpret. Her whole body language screamed that something important was happening, but David had no idea what. "I don't understand what you're trying to tell me," David said gently, "but I can see that stuff in your hair is making you really sick. We need to get it out before it gets worse." She stared at him for another long moment, then seemed to come to some kind of decision. She positioned herself with her back to him and leaned forward so her contaminated hair hung down toward the water. But David could see that every muscle in her body was tense, like she was bracing herself for something momentous. David started slowly, dipping his hands in the soapy water and then carefully beginning to work it through her hair. The instant his fingers made contact with her hair, her reaction was immediate and dramatic. She went rigid, making a sound that was part gasp, part musical note, and completely unlike anything David had ever heard. "Did I hurt you?" David asked, pulling his hands back immediately. She shook her head quickly, but she didn't relax at all. If anything, she seemed even more tense than before. David could see her hands shaking where they gripped the edge of the spring. David decided to continue, working as gently as possible. As he began to wash the contamination away, something amazing started to happen. The dark substance was dissolving in the soapy water, and underneath it, her real hair was being revealed. It wasn't just silver-colored like he had thought. It was actually glowing, much brighter than her skin, with an inner light that seemed to pulse like a slow heartbeat. As more of the contamination washed away, the glow got stronger and more beautiful. It was like washing away mud to reveal buried treasure. But even more remarkable was what was happening to the woman herself as her hair got cleaner. She seemed to be going through some kind of intense emotional experience. She was making soft sounds that were definitely musical, but they carried so much feeling that David didn't need to understand the language to know something profound was happening. The sounds weren't sad exactly, but they weren't happy either. They were something much more complex, like someone experiencing wonder and shock and gratitude all at the same time. David had never heard anything like it. "Are you okay?" David asked, pausing in his work. "I mean, I know you can't understand me, but you seem like this is really affecting you." She turned to look at him over her shoulder, and David was struck by the expression on her face. Her purple eyes were wide with what could only be described as amazement, like she had just witnessed something impossible. She said something in her language, and even though David couldn't understand the words, her tone was full of wonder. David continued washing her hair, working carefully to remove every trace of the dark contamination. It was slow, careful work, because he didn't want to hurt her, but gradually the silver glow was restored to its full brightness. Her hair seemed to be made of liquid starlight, flowing and shimmering with every small movement. As the last of the contamination washed away, the change in her was dramatic. Where before she had been weak and struggling to breathe, now she seemed completely healthy and vibrant. The glow had returned to her skin, and she was sitting up straight without any difficulty. But the most dramatic change was in how she was looking at David. She kept staring at him like she had never seen anything like him before in her life. She would start to say something, then stop, then start again, like she couldn't find the right words for what she was feeling. Finally, she managed to say something in English. Her pronunciation was careful and slow, like she was testing each word. I know what this means. David was so surprised to hear her speak his language that it took him a moment to process what she had said. You can understand me, she nodded, then said something in her own language before switching back to English. Your people, she said slowly, like she was being very careful with each word. You give this gift without knowing what you give. Gift? David was confused. I wasn't giving you a gift. I was just trying to help you get better. That stuff in your hair was poisoning you. She stared at him for what felt like forever, then made a sound that was almost like laughter. But not quite. It was more like the sound someone makes when they realize something that changes everything they thought they knew. She reached up and touched her now clean hair with wonder, running her fingers through the glowing strands like she couldn't believe they were real. In my world, she said, her English getting clearer with each sentence. This is not simple medical treatment. This is sacred thing. Very sacred. David felt his stomach drop. Sacred how? She struggled to find the right words, switching back and forth between her musical language and English, from what David could understand. The cleaning of someone's hair was something that was only done between people who were very close. It was a sign of deep trust and connection, something that carried serious meaning in her culture. Oh no, David said, feeling terrible. I didn't know. I'm really sorry. I was just trying to help. But she shook her head firmly. No sorry, she said. No sorry at all. She stood up and walked to the edge of the spring, looking at her reflection in the clear water. Her hair moved around her like it was alive, catching and reflecting the morning sunlight in ways that seemed almost magical. When she turned back to David, there was something in her expression that took his breath away. You're kind, she said carefully. You do sacred things without need to know they are sacred. This is, she paused, searching for the right English word. This is most beautiful thing. David still wasn't sure he fully understood what had just happened, but he could see that something incredibly important had taken place. The woman, who had been dying from contamination, was now healthy and strong, and she was looking at him like he had just performed some kind of miracle. What should I call you? David asked. I know I can't pronounce your real name, she said her musical name again, but then seemed to think about it. You may call me Luna, she said. It is close to my real name, and it is word your mouth can say. Luna, David repeated. That's a beautiful name. She smiled for the first time since he had found her, and it was like watching the sun come up. Her whole face lit up, and the glow from her skin got brighter. David, she said, pronouncing his name with that same musical quality. Thank you for sacred gift. Even though you did not know you were giving sacred gift, as they prepared to head back to his campsite, David realized that something had fundamentally changed between them. What had started as a simple rescue had become something much deeper and more meaningful. He had no idea what the implications were, but he could feel that this moment would be important for both of them. Walking back through the desert, Luna seemed like a completely different person than the dying being he had found in the wreckage. She moved with confidence and grace, her hair flowing around her like a silver waterfall. But she kept looking at David with that same expression of wonder. like she still couldn't quite believe what had happened. David found himself thinking about how strange life could be. He had come to the desert looking for peace and quiet, and instead he had stumbled into what might be the most important encounter in human history. And it had all started because he couldn't walk away from someone who needed help. What he didn't know was that his simple act of compassion had just changed the course of two civilizations. Sometimes the most important moments happen not because of grand plans or important decisions, but because one person sees another person suffering and decides to do something about it. As they walked back toward his campsite together, neither David nor Luna could have imagined how far the ripples of this moment would spread. Back at the campsite, Luna sat quietly while David made himself some coffee on his small camping stove. The transformation in her was incredible to see. Just a few hours ago, she had been unconscious and dying. Now she looked vibrant and healthy, her silver hair flowing around her like liquid light. But David could tell something heavy was on her mind. She kept looking at him with that same expression of wonder mixed with something that might have been worry. During their walk back from the spring, she had been mostly quiet, occasionally saying something in her musical language that sounded like she was talking to herself. "You want some coffee?" David asked, holding up his camping mug. "I don't know if your people drink anything like this, but you're welcome to try it." Luna shook her head politely, then surprised him by speaking in much clearer English than before. "David, I must tell you something very important about what you did for me at the spring." David set down his coffee and turned to give her his full attention. Something about her tone told him this was going to be serious. "Okay, I'm listening." Luna took a deep breath, like she was preparing herself for a difficult conversation. "In my world, we have very different customs than your people. Different rules about how we interact with each other, especially when it comes to personal care." "I figured things would be different," David said. "I mean, you're from another planet. Of course your culture would be different from ours." "The cleaning of hair," Luna continued, speaking slowly and carefully, "it is not a simple medical procedure. For my people, it is something much more important, much more personal and sacred." David felt a chill run down his spine. "How sacred are we talking about here?" Luna looked down at her hands, like she was embarrassed. "Among my people, hair is considered the most private and sacred part of our bodies. Only certain people are allowed to touch it. Family members, like parents with their children, or siblings with each other." And she paused, clearly struggling with how to explain this. "And those who have chosen to bond their lives together." "Bond their lives together?" David's eyes widened. "You mean like getting married?" Luna nodded slowly. "Very much like what you call marriage, yes. When two of my people decide to spend their lives as partners, the very first ceremony they perform together is the cleaning of each other's hair. It shows complete trust, complete acceptance, and complete connection between two souls." David stared at her, feeling like the ground had just shifted under his feet. "So when I clean your hair, according to the customs of my people," Luna said quietly, "you perform the most sacred bonding ritual that exists in our entire culture. You did something that we reserve only for the most important and intimate relationships in our lives." David ran his hands through his own hair, suddenly feeling overwhelmed. "I had no idea. I mean, I was just trying to save your life. That contamination was killing you." "I know that," Luna said quickly. "And that is exactly what makes this so extraordinary." "Extraordinary?" David looked at her in confusion. "Luna, I accidentally performed some kind of alien marriage ceremony without knowing it. How's that extraordinary? I feel terrible about this." Luna stood up and walked to the edge of his campsite, looking out at the desert landscape. The morning sun was getting higher now, and the heat was starting to build. "Because you did it without knowing what it meant," she said. "You saw someone in desperate need, and you gave the most precious gift my people can give to each other, without expecting anything in return, without even knowing it was a gift." She turned back to face him, and David could see intense emotion in her purple eyes. "David, do you know what my people believe about humans? I didn't even know your people knew we existed until yesterday." "Oh, we know about your species," Luna said. We have been watching your world for many, many years. We have studied your history, your cultures, your behaviors, and most of my people have come to believe that humans are dangerous creatures. David felt his heart sink. Dangerous how? They think humans are violent and selfish. Luna continued. They believe your people only care about yourselves and could never be trusted with knowledge of other civilizations. They think humans would use that knowledge to try to conquer or exploit other worlds. And what did you think? David asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Luna was quiet for a moment. Looking back out at the desert, I thought they were probably right until yesterday. She walked back over to him and sat down again. My ship crashed because of a malfunction in our containment systems. Toxic waste from our engines leaked into my living quarters while I was sleeping. If you had not found me when you did, if you had not removed that poison from my hair, I would have died within a few hours. I couldn't just leave you there to die, David said. But you could have, Luna replied. You could have run away in fear. You could have called your military or government officials and let them deal with me. You could have helped me from a distance, been careful not to get too personally involved. She reached out and gently touched his arm. Instead, you carried me to safety when I was completely helpless. You stayed with me through the night, watching over me when I was unconscious and vulnerable. And then, when you saw that I needed intimate care to survive, you gave it without hesitation, without question, without asking for anything in return. David looked down at where her hand was resting on his arm. Her skin was warm and incredibly soft, and that gentle glow seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. What does this mean for us now? I mean, if your people consider what I did to be like marriage. Luna was quiet for a long moment. I honestly do not know, she said. This situation has never happened before in the history of my people. No human has ever performed our bonding ritual. No one from my world has ever been cared for by someone from yours in such an intimate way. She squeezed his arm gently. What I do know is that you have completely changed how I see your species. And when I return to my people and tell them what happened here, it will force them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about humans. Will you get in trouble for this? I do not think so, Luna said thoughtfully. But there will definitely be many long discussions and debates. Some will say that the ritual does not count because you are not one of our people. Others will argue that intention and purity of heart matter more than species, and that your selfless motivation makes the bond even more meaningful than if you had known what you were doing. David tried to wrap his mind around all of this. What do you think? Luna smiled. And once again it was like watching the sunrise. I think you have shown me something beautiful about humanity that I never knew existed. You have proven that your people are capable of performing the most sacred acts without needing sacred knowledge. That you can give the greatest gifts without wanting anything in return. She stood up and walked over to where pieces of her ship were still visible in the distance. I need to begin working on repairs soon. My people will send search parties if I do not return within the next few days. How long will it take to fix your ship if I work continuously and everything goes well? Perhaps until tomorrow evening. Luna said, but David, there is something else you need to understand about what happens next. What's that? Luna turned back to him, and for the first time since she had recovered, she looked uncertain about something. When I return to my world and tell my people what happened between us, it will change everything. Your act of compassion, your willingness to help without understanding the significance. It will force my people to completely reconsider their opinions about humans. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I believe it is a very good thing, Luna said. But it means that this encounter between us, this moment we have shared, will not be forgotten or ignored. My people will want to learn more about yours. They will want to understand how a species can be capable of such unexpected kindness and selflessness. David felt the weight of enormous responsibility settling on his shoulders. So what happens now? Now, we spend whatever time we have left learning from each other, Luna said, and I prepare myself for what may be the most important conversation in the history of both our civilizations. As David looked at Luna, with her glowing hair and her beautiful, otherworldly features, He realized that his quiet vacation in the desert had become something he never could have imagined. He had somehow become Earth's first unofficial ambassador to another world, all because he had been unable to ignore someone's suffering. And despite the enormity of what lay ahead, that felt exactly right to him. The next day and a half passed like the most incredible dream David had ever experienced. Luna worked on repairing her ship using tools and technology that seemed to defy everything he thought he knew about physics. Meanwhile, David helped in whatever small ways he could and tried to absorb every moment of this impossible situation. But the real magic happened during their breaks from the repair work. They talked for hours, sharing stories about their worlds, their lives, their hopes and fears. Luna's English improved rapidly with practice, and David even managed to learn a few basic words in her musical language, though he could never make them sound as beautiful as when she said them. Every conversation felt like discovering a new universe. Luna told him about cities that floated in the clouds of her home planet, about art forms that used living light as paint, about music that could actually heal physical injuries. In return, David shared stories about human culture, about the beauty of Earth's oceans and forests, about the way people could come together to help each other during disasters. As the sun began to set on what David knew would be their last evening together, Luna called him over to her ship. The repairs were almost finished, and the strange metal hull was beginning to glow with that same soft light as her hair. The ship was preparing itself for the journey home. "There is something I want to give you before I leave," Luna said, reaching up to touch her hair. "You don't need to give me anything," David protested. "Getting to know you, having these conversations, that's been more than enough reward for me." But Luna was already carefully separating several strands of her glowing hair from the rest. She worked them together in a complex braiding pattern that seemed to make the light pulse in a steady rhythm. When she was finished, she held the small braid out to David. "Among my people," she explained, "when someone performs the hair cleansing ritual for another person, it is traditional for the one who was cleansed to give a gift of their own hair in return. It is a way of saying that the bond is accepted, honored, and will be remembered forever." David took the braid carefully in his hands. It was warm, almost alive, and the light seemed to pulse in time with his own heartbeat. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. But Luna, I need you to understand something before you go." "What is that?" David looked into her amazing purple eyes, wanting to be completely honest with her. "I don't know what any of this means for the future. I don't know if I'll ever see you again, or if your people will decide they want to have contact with humans. But I want you to know that meeting you and helping you has been the most important thing that has ever happened to me." Luna's eyes began to shimmer with what looked like tears, though they seemed to glow like tiny stars instead of being clear like human tears. "David, do you remember what I told you about my people's beliefs regarding humans? That you thought we were dangerous and selfish?" "Yes, but there was something else I did not tell you before." Luna stepped closer to him. "We also believe that humans were incapable of true spiritual connection. We thought your people could only understand relationships that were based on what you could gain from them." She reached out and touched the glowing braid in his hands. "But you have shown me that humans can give the most sacred gifts without even knowing they are giving gifts. You have proven that your people are capable of love without conditions, help without expectations, and sacrifice without hope of reward. So what happens when you go back?" David asked. "When you tell your people about all this, what will you say?" Luna looked up at the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. The first few bright points of light were becoming visible, and David wondered which one might be her home. "I will tell them about a human named David who found a dying stranger and chose to help her, even though she was completely alien to him. I will tell them how he gave her the most precious gift in our culture, not because he wanted something in return, but because he could not bear to watch another being suffer." She turned back to him, and her expression was full of hope and determination. "And I will tell them that if one human can be capable of such pure compassion, then perhaps it is time for our peoples to meet each other properly." David felt his heart start racing. "You mean like official first contact?" Between our species? I mean, like the beginning of friendship between worlds, Luna said. It will not happen immediately, of course. These things take time, and there will be many long discussions and debates among my people. But yes, David, I believe your simple act of kindness has started something that will eventually change both our worlds forever. Just then, Luna's ship began to hum with energy. All the repairs were complete, and the vessel was ready to carry her home to the stars. Will I ever see you again? David asked, surprised by how much the thought of her leaving hurt. Luna smiled mysteriously. In my culture, when two people share the hair cleansing ritual, they are connected for life. That connection does not break just because they are separated by distance. Even if that distance spans entire solar systems. She walked toward her ship, then turned back one final time. Take good care of that braid, David. It will continue to glow as long as our connection remains strong. And who knows? Perhaps someday you will have visitors who come to Earth not as strangers or invaders, but as friends of the human who first showed us what true kindness means. David watched as Luna's ship rose silently into the star-filled sky. Its lights grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely among the countless points of light above. He stood there for a long time, holding the glowing braid and thinking about everything that had happened. When he finally returned to his tent, David carefully placed the braid in a small protective box where it would be safe, even hours later. It continued to pulse with that gentle, rhythmic light, a constant reminder that somewhere among the stars, someone remembered his kindness and carried the story of their meeting back to her people. 3 months later, David was back home in the city, working his regular shifts as a paramedic. He had never told anyone about his encounter with Luna, partly because he knew no one would believe such an incredible story, but mostly because it felt too precious and important to share casually. But every night before bed, he would check on the braid in its box, and every night it still glowed just as brightly as the day Luna had given it to him. And sometimes, when he was helping patients who were scared or in pain, David would remember Luna's words about humans being capable of sacred acts without sacred knowledge. He would remember that sometimes the simplest acts of compassion and care can change everything, even if you never know how far those changes will reach. The official first contact between humans and Luna's people wouldn't happen for another 2 years. But when it finally did, when the ships appeared peacefully over major cities around the world, the first message they broadcast was simple and clear. We come as friends, seeking the people of David, who showed us that kindness needs no translation. Between worlds, David never became famous for his role in humanity's first contact with alien life. He never wanted that kind of attention, but he kept Luna's glowing braid for the rest of his life. A reminder that sometimes the most important moments in history begin with nothing more complicated than one person's refusal to walk away from someone who needs help. And in the new era of friendship and cooperation between Earth and the stars that followed, that simple truth became the foundation of everything. The understanding that real connection between any two beings, no matter how different they might seem, always starts with the basic decision to care about each other's well-being.